The spray paint hissed against the weathered wood of the forest watchtower, the letters crude and bold in the dusk. Old Man's Perch, one teen snickered, tossing the can into the pine needles. John stood at the clearing's edge, his navy cap low, the air thick with the scent of sap and damp earth, his silence heavier than the wind's rustle through the trees. He didn't flinch, but his hand tightened around a faded photo in his pocket, a young girl's smile long gone from his life. No one saw the fire start, but what happened next would burn brighter than the flames. The main forest stretched vast and untamed around the watchtower, a century-old sentinel perched on a rocky ridge overlooking endless pines. The air was sharp with resin and the faint musk of moss, the ground carpeted with needles that crunched underfoot. Owls hooted in the distance, their calls weaving through the creak of branches swaying in the evening breeze. The watchtower, its wooden frame grayed by time, stood tall despite its peeling paint and rusted ladder, its lookout platform a solitary eye scanning for smoke. John, at 85, was its keeper, a title that felt hollow in a world of drones and forgotten heroes. Inside, the watchtower smelled of old timber and lantern oil, its narrow stairs groaning under John's careful steps. A folded American flag rested on a shelf beside a tarnished brass compass, relics of a life shaped by duty. His navy cap, faded but ever-present, sat low over eyes that had seen Pacific storms, the flash of gunfire, and the slow fade of his daughter, Emily, into a life that no longer included him. A dog-eared photo of his wartime crew, tucked in his wallet, was his anchor to those days. The anchor tattoo on his forearm, blurred by time, peeked from beneath his flannel sleeve as he checked the tower's binoculars, his hands steady despite their tremble. John's days were quiet, woven into the rhythm of Millinocket, a small logging town nestled in Maine's wilderness. He'd shuffle to the Pine Grove Diner for coffee, where locals nodded but rarely spoke, their lives consumed by sawmills and hunting seasons. The Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, a weathered building by the town square, was where he'd sit sometimes, listening to younger vets trade stories of desert wars while he sipped his beer in silence. A framed photo of his destroyer, the USS Fletcher, hung on the wall, unnoticed. To them, John was just the old man who kept the watchtower, his past as faded as the paint on its beams. The trouble began on a Friday, when the air was cool and the forest hummed with evening life. John was sweeping the tower's base when he heard laughter, sharp, careless, cutting through the owl's calls. 3 teens, hoods up and spray cans in hand, were scrawling on the tower's wooden legs. "Old Man's Perch," one said, voice dripping with mockery. Another, a girl with purple hair, laughed. "Bet he talks to the trees up there." The third, a lanky boy named Caleb, hesitated, his eyes darting to John, but he stayed silent, caught in his friend's pull. John stood still, his broom idle. "Go home," he said, voice low but firm like an officer's command softened by age. The teens froze, then snickered. "Relax, Grandpa," the first boy, Ethan, said. "Just messing around." They sauntered off, leaving Old Man in red paint across the tower's base. John's jaw tightened, but he turned back to his work, the sting of their words settling deep. He thought of Emily, her last call months ago, her voice distant over Boston's noise. "I'm busy, Dad," she'd said. "Busy." The word echoed like the teens' laughter. That night, John sat in the watchtower's lookout, its windows framing a sea of dark pines. He pulled the photo from his wallet, Emily at 6, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a pine cone from this very forest. He'd been her hero then, fresh from the war, his uniform crisp and his stories endless. Now he was invisible, a relic like the tower itself. The folded flag on the shelf seemed to mock him, a reminder of sacrifices no one remembered. Somewhere, a deer rustled through the underbrush and John closed his eyes, hearing the faint strains of taps from a memorial service years ago. The next evening the teens returned. John saw their flashlights bobbing through the trees, heard the clatter of beer cans. He stepped outside, his bad knee protesting, and saw them climbing the tower's ladder, daring each other to the top. "Careful," he called, his voice swallowed by the wind. Ethan laughed, spraying more paint, random swirls this time, a taunt without words. Caleb again hung back, his flashlight lingering on John's cap, its navy emblem glinting faintly. "Come on, man," Ethan snapped, and Caleb followed, reluctant. Then it happened. A spark from their dropped can, maybe, or a cigarette they thought they'd stomped out. The dry needles at the tower's base caught, flames licking up the slope toward the teens on the ladder. They shouted, scrambling, but the fire spread fast, fed by the wind and brittle undergrowth. Ethan slipped, his ankle twisting, and the girl screamed, trapped on a narrow platform as smoke thickened. Caleb froze, his flashlight shaking. John didn't think. His body moved before his mind could argue, the way it had on the Fletcher when a kamikaze plane screamed toward the deck. He grabbed the fire extinguisher from the tower's entry, his hands remembering the weight of Navy-issued gear. His knee screamed, but he climbed the slope, the air now choked with smoke and pine ash. "Stay low," he barked, voice cutting through the chaos like a bosun's call. He sprayed the extinguisher, carving a path through the flames, and reached Ethan first, pulling him free with a strength that surprised even himself. The girl was next, coughing, her eyes wide with panic. John guided her down, his hand steady on her arm. Caleb, still on the ladder, helped her the final steps, his face pale but focused. The fire was small but stubborn, and John worked methodically, smothering it with foam and dirt, his wartime training, hours spent drilling fire control, guiding his hands. When the last ember died, he stood panting, his cap askew, the anchor tattoo stark against his sweat-soaked skin. The teens stared, silent for once. Caleb's eyes locked on the tattoo, then flicked to the cap. You were in the Navy?" he asked, voice small. John nodded, brushing ash from his hands. "Long time ago," he said, turning back to the tower. He didn't see Caleb's expression shift, the dawning respect in his eyes. The next morning John woke to voices outside. He peered through the tower's window, expecting trouble. Instead he saw Caleb and the others, Ethan limping, the girl subdued, scrubbing the graffiti from the wood. A bucket of soapy water sat nearby, and a local logger, Tom, who'd served in Vietnam, was supervising, his VFW cap tilted back. "Heard what you did," Tom said when John stepped out. "These kids owe you." Caleb approached, head down. "We're sorry, Mr. John. Didn't know," he trailed off, gesturing to the tower. "Found this while cleaning." He held out a yellowed envelope, its edges frayed. John's breath caught. It was a letter from 1945, tucked in a storage box he'd forgotten, describing his actions at Okinawa, how he'd manned a gun under fire, saving his crew. The teens had read it, their faces solemn. "We didn't know," Caleb repeated. "You're a hero." John shook his head, uncomfortable with the word. "Just did my job," he said, but his voice cracked, betraying the weight of being seen. The girl Mia spoke up. "We want to make it right. All of us." She glanced at Tom, who nodded. Over the next week, the teens rallied the town. Caleb, the mayor's nephew, led the charge, his guilt driving him. They organized a cleanup day, repainting the tower a fresh cedar brown, its platform gleaming under new varnish. Word spread, and the VFW got involved, proposing to rededicate the watchtower as a veterans memorial. At the ceremony the town gathered, loggers, diner staff, even hunters, under a canopy of pines streaked with dawn's gold. Tom presented John with a plaque engraved with his name and service, to be mounted on the tower's base. John stood straighter, his navy cap adjusted just so. The crowd clapped, and for the first time in years he felt their eyes, not pitying, not dismissive, but respectful. Caleb, nearby, whispered, "I called someone for you. Found her number in the letter." John's heart skipped. "Emily." He scanned the crowd, half expecting her familiar face, but she wasn't there. Not yet. The possibility lingered, a quiet hope. As the ceremony ended, John touched the plaque, his fingers tracing the words, "In honor of John Mercer, World War II veteran, keeper of the watch." The forest whispered, the air lighter now, and he allowed himself a small smile. The watchtower stood tall, no longer just his burden but a symbol of something greater. This is the power of small acts, how a moment of courage can spark respect, how a community can heal what's broken. Look around you, the heroes are there, quiet and unnoticed. Honor them. Share their stories. Subscribe to Hoffman Stories for more tales of compassion and connection, and join us for part 2 where John's journey, and the question of Emily's return, unfolds. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying the sharp scent of sap and the distant hoot of an owl. John stood at the watchtower's base, his navy cap shielding his eyes from the late September sun. The plaque gleamed on the wooden beam, in honor of John Mercer, World War II veteran, keeper of the watch, its letters bold against the fresh cedar stain. The forest stretched endless around him, its shadows dancing with the rustle of leaves. John's hand rested on the photo in his pocket, Emily's young smile a memory that hadn't faded. He hadn't heard from her since Caleb's whispered promise at the ceremony, but the hope lingered, fragile as a twig in the wind. Millinocket had changed in the weeks since the fire. The watchtower, once a forgotten outpost, was now a point of pride. Locals stopped by with coffee or venison stew, their nods warm, weighted with respect. The VFW hall buzzed with plans to make the tower a permanent veterans memorial, with Tom, the Vietnam vet, leading the effort. Caleb, Mia, and even Ethan, the once reckless teen, were regulars now, hauling paint cans or clearing underbrush, their laughter softer, their eyes meeting John's with quiet apology. But John's thoughts drifted to Emily, her last call, her voice clipped over Boston's din, the years stretching between them like a forest he couldn't cross. The watchtower felt different too. Its stairs still creaked, but the lookout platform was spotless, its windows polished to a gleam. The folded flag on the shelf, once a private reminder, now sat beside a display, the 1945 letter Caleb had found, framed with a photo of John's crew on the USS Fletcher. Visitors, loggers, townsfolk, some hunters, paused to read it, their whispers carrying words like Okinawa and hero. John brushed off the praise, his anchor tattoo hidden beneath his sleeve, but the attention stirred something in him, a warmth he hadn't felt since Emily was small, clutching a pine cone on this very ridge. One crisp morning as John swept the tower's base, a truck rumbled up the dirt path. Caleb hopped out, his hoodie swapped for a VFW cap Tom had given him. "Got something for you, Mr. John," he said, holding out a small box. Inside was a brass ship's bell, salvaged from a decommissioned Navy vessel. "For the memorial," Caleb said. "Thought you should ring it first." John's fingers traced the bell's cool surface, its weight pulling him back to the Fletcher's deck, the clang of signals under fire. He nodded, throat tight. "Thank you, son." The bell was just the start. The town rallied, transforming the tower's clearing. Loggers donated timber for benches. The diner's cook, Mary, organized bake sales to fund a flagpole. The teens, led by Caleb, planted wildflowers along the path, their roots tough enough to grip the rocky soil. Mia, the girl with purple hair, painted a sign, Millinocket Watchtower Veterans Memorial. Ethan, his ankle healed, hauled stones for a small garden, his earlier swagger replaced by quiet focus. John watched from the ridge, his cane steady against the wind, marveling at how one night, the fire, the rescue, had rippled outward. But Emily remained a shadow. Caleb had found her number in the wartime letter, tucked among John's papers, and said he'd called her. She listened, he'd told John, eyes earnest. Said she'd think about it. Think about it. The words stung, echoing her last call. "I'm busy, Dad." John didn't push, didn't ask Caleb to try again. He'd learned long ago in the Pacific's endless nights that some things, storms, enemies, even family, couldn't be forced. You waited and you endured. The memorial's dedication was set for a Sunday, when the sky was clear and the pines glowed with autumn's gold. The town gathered at the watchtower, their boots crunching on pine needles. A new flagpole stood tall, its halyard clinking softly. Tom, in his VFW cap, led the ceremony, his voice steady as he recounted John's service, how he'd manned a gun at Okinawa, shielding his crew from a burning deck. The crowd, loggers, diner staff, even hunters, listened, their faces solemn. Caleb, Mia, and Ethan stood at the front, their hands clasped, no trace of their old defiance. John stood by the tower's base, his navy cap low, the brass bell at his side. Tom called him forward and the crowd parted. "This is your day, John," Tom said, handing him the halyard. John raised the flag, his hands steady despite their tremble, the stars and stripes snapping in the breeze. The crowd saluted, some crisp, some awkward, and a young vet from the VFW played taps on a bugle, its notes carrying through the trees. John's eyes stung, not from the wind but from the weight of being seen, truly seen after years of invisibility. Then Caleb stepped forward, holding the bell. "Mr. John, will you ring it?" he asked. John hesitated, his fingers brushing the photo in his pocket. He thought of his crew, the ones who didn't come home, and of Emily wherever she was. He gripped the bell's rope and pulled, its clear, deep clang echoing over the forest. The crowd was silent, the sound binding them to something larger. Duty, sacrifice, the quiet strength of those who carry on. As the ceremony ended, people approached John, shaking his hand, their words simple but heavy. "Thank you," Mary from the diner said, pressing a warm biscuit into his hand. A logger clapped his shoulder, muttering, "Navy tough, huh?" John nodded, his throat too tight for words. He scanned the crowd again, searching for a face he hadn't seen in years, Emily's dark hair, her quick smile. Nothing. But Caleb caught his eye, giving a small nod as if to say, "I tried." That evening, John sat in the watchtower's lookout, the forest a dark sea below. The bell's echo lingered in his mind as did the crowd's respect, their hands on his, their eyes meeting his. He pulled out Emily's photo, its edges worn thin. "Maybe someday, kid," he whispered, his voice soft as the pines rustle. A knock came at the tower door. John frowned, Visitors were rare after dark. He descended the creaking stairs, his cane tapping, and opened the door to find a woman standing in the moonlight. She was in her 50s, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes, those were Emily's, sharp and searching. "Dad," she said, voice breaking. John froze, his hand gripping the doorframe. "Caleb called me," she continued. "Told me everything. I should have come sooner." John stepped forward, the wind tugging at his cap. "You're here now," he said, the words rough but warm. Emily's eyes filled, and she reached for him, her hug fierce, like the child who'd once clutched a pine cone on this ridge. They stood there, the tower's shadow stretching over the forest, its presence steady as a heartbeat. The next morning, Emily helped John clean the lookout's windows, her hands learning the rhythm of his work. She asked about the Fletcher, the war, the years she'd missed. He told her stories, some funny, some heavy, his voice stronger with each one. The town kept coming too, adding benches, planting more wildflowers, making the watchtower a place of pilgrimage. Emily stayed a week, then promised to return, her number now saved in John's phone, a bridge rebuilt. The watchtower stood taller, its platform prouder, a beacon for veterans and wanderers alike. John, no longer invisible, walked its grounds with a straighter back, his navy cap proud. The bell rang each Sunday, a call to remember, to respect, to act with kindness. And in Millinocket they did. Small acts, saving a tower, ringing a bell, making a call, can change everything. Look for the heroes in your town, the ones whose stories wait in the shadows. Honor them. Share their light. Subscribe to Hoffman Stories for more tales of compassion and courage, and let John's story remind you, it's never too late to come home.